Hi everyone, welcome to week 5 of your Pharmacy Procedures 1 course. This week you do not have a written assignment, you only have your midterm exam to complete. But I want you to make sure that you remember that you do still have a chapter to read and understand this week before you take the midterm exam. Chapter 5 is all about units of measure used in the pharmacy, and this chapter will be represented on your midterm exam. So make sure that you're familiar with this information before you try to take your midterm exam. So let's dig into some of those units of measure that you're going to be introduced to. The first is the international unit. An international unit is not like some of the other units that you may have seen. So it's not like grams and milligrams and things like that. It's not a weight. It actually measures the drug's action. So what the drug actually does. We do not typically use an abbreviation. The Joint Commission has a list of abbreviations that are do not use. In other words, they're not good units or abbreviations to use because they can be easily misinterpreted, and international units is one of those. It used to be where you would see the letter U or IU, but now they don't do that at all. Instead, what they do is they use a number, so whatever the number might be, followed by the word units. We also don't use a comma unless there's more than 5 digits in the number. So one of the common uses is both insulin and heparin. And here's an example of Lantus insulin. And if you can see on the picture right here, it says 100 units per milliliter. So that's how we measure with both insulin and with heparin. Now the next measurement that we're going to talk about is percentage measurements. Percentage measurements tell us how many parts per 100 we have. So if you look at this, this kind of gives you an example of, concentration. The more stuff we have in something, the higher the concentration. So the stronger the solution. So this is just kind of a visual representation of this. You're going to usually see percents in IV solutions, also in topical things, eyes, skin, things like that. This is an example of what you might see in an IV solution. Here's an example of sodium chloride, and you can see on the label it says 0.9%. And so following this example that they give you up here, if 5% contains 5 grams of drug, this 0.9% then would contain 0.9 grams of drug in every 100 milliliters. So just again, another way to measure. The most common ones you're going to see are dextrose and sodium chloride. So D5W, dextrose 5%, sodium chloride. Again, the one we just looked at was sodium chloride. 0.9% is considered normal saline, so NS. They're referring here to 0.45%, which is half normal saline. So you're going to see both of those in use. Okay, the next thing we're going to be looking at is milliequivalents, and it's the number of grams of drug in 1 ml of normal solution. So we always write an Arabic number followed by a space and then the abbreviation milliequivalent with MEQ, and the E is always capitalized. So here's an example. Potassium chloride is one of the most common that uses milliequivalents, and as you can see on this label, it's a little small, but right here in the center, in this area, it says 40 milliequivalents. And then it also tells you that there's 20 mils in this vial. So right down here in the small space, they reduce that for you as well. So not only do we have 40 milliequivalents in 20 mils, down here it tells us that means we have 2 milliequivalents in every single mil. So you'll see it written in both ways. Sometimes on labels, both the way what's actually in the bottle as well as the reduced fraction. Percents and milliequivalents can be combined when we're talking about IV solutions. And this is just an example of what it might say. So if you've got several different things in your IV solution, it might have all of these things listed on it. So they're showing you, okay, what if it's 5% dextrose in water with half normal saline and 20 milliequivalents of potassium chloride? How do we write that? And that's what this piece right here is all about. This would be how you would see it written on an actual label. Then we also have what's called ratio measures, and ratio measures just tell us how we compare two things. So in this case, they're talking about 1 to 100, which would mean 1 part of drug to 100 parts of solution. Then we go on to talk about household measurements, and household measurements are probably things you're very familiar with, at least some of the larger ones: gallons, quarts, pints, cups, tablespoons, teaspoons. So they go on and explain a little bit about ounces, drops. A drop is something that is considered household, even though you may not actually use it a lot. Here's an example of a household measurement of drops that's used in a preparation for the ear. So this is an otic solution. So you can see it's got a dropper that comes along with it. And these are just some of the abbreviations for some of the household measurements and what they are equivalent to in metric system. 1 ounce, abbreviated OZ, is equal to 30 mils. 1 tablespoon is 15. 1 teaspoon is 5, and 1 drop is typically 1. And 1 drop is usually an estimated 1 mil. You might see it estimated at other numbers as well, because keep in mind, a dropper can be different sizes. But these first 3 are key conversions that you need to make sure that you understand and know. So make sure you review those. And last but not least, there's apothecary measurements. These are really pretty obsolete. The only one you're really going to see used much is grain. And as you can see, I've got an example of phenobarbital on here. And equivalents in the apothecary system, we have 1 grain is equal to 60 milligrams. So you can see on this particular example, this is a quarter grain. So that means it's a quarter of 60. So 16.2 is where that came. That's where that came from. So as you're going through this week's material, if you have any problems or questions, please make sure you reach out to me. Again, please make sure you go over Chapter 5 before you attempt your exam, and have a great week.